Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Christian with On the Horizon, a program that celebrates new and exciting upcoming creative work. I'm here today with Ann Daly, a very exciting author who is writing a book about Georgia O'Keeffe. Welcome, Ann.
Hi, Francesca.
Ann Daly is an author who has spent her career writing about women artists, from Isadora Duncan to Pina Bausch, and now Georgia O'Keeffe. She is a hybrid writer working across the boundaries of journalism and scholarship. Ann taught at the University of Texas at Austin for many years and has contributed to publications such as the New York Times and the Houston Chronicle. Now, some background on Georgia O'Keeffe. She was born in 1887 and lived to be 98 years old. She is considered one of the most significant artists of the 20th century. O'Keeffe is still a force in American art, best known for her paintings of enlarged flowers and New Mexico landscapes. She has further been described as the mother of American modernism. In recent years, O'Keeffe became well known for her painting Jimson Weed White Flower No. 1, a painting that sold at auction at Sotheby's in New York for $44.4 million in 2016. Just 4 years ago. This book is a deep, deep dive into a significant body of archival research that has been tracked, curated, and developed over the past 6 years, with a focus on what O'Keeffe made and how she made it. So, Ann, my first question is this. What made you want to spend 6 years of your life writing about Georgia O'Keeffe?
6 years and counting. Well, it was accident and curiosity. I mean, I was an art history minor in college, and I learned of the great modern artists of Europe and great fan of Picasso and Matisse and Pollock, etc. Didn't really know much about O'Keeffe, but when I found myself visiting Santa Fe, of course, I went to the museum, I went to the Abiquiu house, I took the van tour to see spots where she made her paintings. And I was curious, went home, read a biography, read another biography. It didn't really answer my questions. We found ourselves again in Santa Fe about a year later. And I found myself in front of a painting, one of her two Mount Fuji paintings from 1960. She went to Japan several times, and I was just awestruck. I just in my spot, hardly breathing. It was so beautiful and so moving. Why? There's hardly anything there. It's shades of pink and white and very minimalist, and I was hooked. I thought, what is she doing, and why is it affecting me so much? So I went home and I read more books and more articles. Then eventually I thought, I'm hooked. There's so much here that hasn't been written about O'Keeffe in terms of her paintings. And I discovered one day, well, yeah, I have a book. Let's do it.
I love that too, because you talk about these kinesthetic connections that you have to her paintings as really what's got you started on this journey. You once said to me that a person cannot understand O'Keeffe without understanding the breadth of her work.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, she painted for about 60 years from, just after the turn of the 20th century to the end. And the breadth of her imaginative reinvention at different points in her life, how she kept finding new ways of seeing the world and new ways of bringing that world into her painting, is even more spectacular than just standing in front of one of her most beautiful paintings. So to bring all of the complexity and all of the depth together, to see everything from, yes, we know the New Mexico landscapes, we know the flowers, but what about that little avocado, just a little portrait of a little avocado from, I think, 23 that I just fell in love with. And I want my readers to fall in love with it too.
I love that. In her 80s, O'Keeffe became legally blind. She suffered from age-related macular degeneration, a condition that caused her to lose the acuity of her central vision, but it left her peripheral vision intact. With modifications and with hands-on assistance, O'Keeffe continued to paint. Ann has agreed to read an excerpt from her book about O'Keeffe's experience of painting at this time in her life. I take a little bit of credit here for the inclusion of this excerpt, because I did encourage Ann to finish this chapter before this interview, and she did.
Yes. Yes, I am a journalist through and through, and I always need a deadline, so thank you for that. So this is the last substantive chapter of the book with her last painting. She did several series at the time that she was legally blind and not correctable with lenses, although she had peripheral vision. We're very lucky in that we have eyewitness accounts from the assistant, Mino Lopez, who helped her with these watercolors. So the chapter really is, as you say, a deep dive into what these were, how she did them. And what I'll read for you now is a little bit about what she did. In place of vision came muscle memory. For some of the watercolors, it even appears that O'Keeffe may have rehearsed her gesture by first executing it with water. Here she is, finally, completely released from the burden of visible reality, retrieving from her body those spare archetypal shapes that had initiated her artistic practice 60 years earlier in South Carolina, as she cramped up sitting on the floor, painting, working against the closet door. O'Keeffe knew them so intimately, the circle, the curve, the spiral, the straight line, the wavy line. She reprises these personal hieroglyphs in both fresh and familiar configurations, with broad, dramatic gestures. And she still revels in those saturated colors, vivid combinations, and her beloved everlasting blue. For O'Keeffe, the brush in hand was never simply a mechanical tool. It possessed its own expressive life, an extension of her own, with a force and a cadence that she could hear as well as feel.
Thank you. That is incredible.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad I got to hear that read out loud. So, Ann, if O'Keeffe were sitting here talking to you right now, what do you think she would say about just being here, being alive as a human being in the world?
I think she would say, be where you are, be present, be alive to, her famous quote, the wideness and wonder of the world. That's really what her painting was about. People overinterpret so much of her work. It really is about, here's what I saw. Here was this extraordinary experience that I felt in my bones, and how I could imagine it to show it to you on the canvas. So she'd say, be where you are. Don't rush off. Be here and find what's so extraordinary just right here and now. She, was much like a Buddhist. She said she was going to be religious, she'd be a Buddhist. She'd also say, be who you are. She was from the beginning, very much an individualist, and she really would tell artists who would come to see her two things: find your voice, fight for it to the end to keep your voice, which she did her entire life, fought very hard to keep who she was, and do the work. Find your voice, do the work. So those are the things I think she'd tell us again here today.
Oh, those are such important things for everyone to hear.
Very simple.
Yes, that's the best part. One working title for your book was Georgia O'Keeffe, a Great Woman Artist. And then you crossed out the word woman.
Yes. I imagine it with big brush strokes. crossing it out. Because, O'Keeffe never bothered to really correct all of the myths that ran rampant around her life and her art. But there were two things that she would never let pass. First, you didn't call her Mrs. Stieglitz. Second, you didn't call her a woman artist, even if you were saying she was the foremost woman artist in America. She knew she was a feminist, and she recognized very early that putting that prefix of woman on artist or doctor or writer or anything is a way that is marking woman as other and less than. You're not an artist, you're a woman artist. So I wanted to kind of telegraph that message at the beginning that, no, we're going to talk about her art as the great artist that she was. And it's a little bit of fun.
You once told me that O'Keeffe suppressed the discussion of her art as a survival strategy. And I think that goes along with this last question that you just answered. But what does that mean exactly?
Well, she would not reply. She had kind of a no comment philosophy from the beginning. When the response to her early abstractions, what that was, orgasmic and coming from the womb, the men couldn't figure out what woman would be painting about. And she decided, that she wasn't going to fan the flame. She was very smart. She knew if she argued about it and talked back about it, that it would just make that image bigger. So she decided her whole life, just no, you decide what you think about my paintings. That's about you. And I'm not going to comment on it.
Just no comment.
Yeah, and it was a way for her to survive and to, again, keep focused on the work and not get distracted by what other people are going to say about her and get all riled up about it. She just decided she wasn't going to. She keep her eye on the prize. That's what that girl did. I'm so inspired by her.
So I do have to ask, what about the big controversy about vaginas? That O'Keeffe's paintings, her flower paintings in particular, represented vaginas.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why she wouldn't comment. She was just, embarrassed by it. To her, that's not what they were. And that's not how I'm going to be reading her paintings. And even Judy Chicago, the very famous feminist artist of the 70s, who did take up O'Keeffe again and wrote about her abstractions in the flowers as vaginas, coming from a very gynocentric point of view. She later on said, when she reviewed a book of O'Keeffe's flowers, that's probably the least interesting thing to say about these flowers. There's so much more to them. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to unring a bell once it's been rung. So I think what I'm trying to do with my book is to explore the richness and the totality of her art, so that maybe we can leave that very limited interpretation behind.
I love that. There is the wonderful OKeeffe Museum in Santa Fe.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I'm calling out to my sister, Mara Christian Harris.
Hey, Mara.
Former marketing manager at the OKeeffe. She helped you get connected to people and resources that supported this work. So many thanks go out to her. Thank you.
I am so thankful to her, but you're being very modest, because you're how I got to Mara. And I'll never forget that day I was having one of my salons, and you and I were sitting slouched back on the couch, and we were going around the room talking about what was up. And I was trying to figure out who I knew, who knew someone at the museum, because everyone and her sister wants to write a book on O'Keeffe. So, and then you just looked over at me and you said,
I think I can help you out here.
My sister is a marketing director at the museum, and everyone in the room just stopped breathing.
Yeah,
it
was a moment. It was a great moment.
Yeah, it was. Thank you very much.
Well, I will add, O'Keeffe is one of the few women artists in the world to have her own museum.
That's true.
Along with Elizabeth Ney right here in Austin, Texas.
Right around the corner from me. I wonder what those two would say to each other if they met. Yeah.
Well, I have to step back for a second and acknowledge the two pieces of work you have done here. First of all, you've been to the OKeeffe Museum. You've worked with the conservator. You've examined the layers of paint, how O'Keeffe placed paint on the canvas. You have studied the process. And you have also worked through the stages of O'Keeffe's life. Mm-hmm. There's a breadth of work in what you have done here as well. So
it's been, I love both of those things. Yeah. I love researching, and I didn't enter the project thinking I was going to do exhaustive archival research. But when I started going to secondhand sources, they didn't answer my questions, or they didn't put things in the right order, or it was a little off. And I come from a background as a journalist and a scholar. And so, I just kept unraveling the thread a little bit more. So I have been able to obtain letters, correspondence from archives all over, because luckily we live in a digital age and they can all come right to my computer. So I love that. And the other thing that I've really loved about this project is learning from Dale Cronkrite, the conservator at the museum, who's been there for the entire history of the museum. I think he probably knows more about her than anybody else. And he has been so patient with me in letting me look over his shoulder and see what he sees through all of his scientific paraphernalia, to understand exactly how she made her paintings, and both sides, and then bringing them together in the writing is a wonderful writerly challenge for me.
And it's so terrific. Yeah. So my last question, and this is my favorite part because it is about putting those two elements together. Mm-hmm. You describe your book as tactile, a personal gallery tour with full-page prints, and you are the tour guide and the friend, offering us up-to-date commentary and a fresh new perspective on O'Keeffe.
Yeah. So while all the research is very detailed and scholarly, I love footnotes. You can read them if you want to. I wanted to structure this as a series of paintings and then write the essays around the paintings to talk about the backstories and what's underneath the surface. And so I start from her student days with a still life that she did in a very conventional way that won her a prize as a student, going to those last watercolors that I read the excerpt from. So I've chosen about 24 of them, some of them familiar favorites and some of them ones that you very rarely go out in public because they're owned by private collections. And I wanted to take all that information and just be tour guide Ann with my little name tag on, and be a friend who just brings you through from gallery to gallery and talk about what I learned. I mean, I want to take the reader to London with me when I go to see the big retrospective that was at the Tate Museum, and I want you to be with me reading these amazing letters, and I want you to be with me as I am looking over Dale's shoulder, looking at all the secrets of how she did what she did. Yes. So that's kind of the spirit that I want to bring to the book.
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know anyone who wouldn't love to have a copy of this book and display it on their coffee table. Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, don't miss getting a copy of this book when it comes out. I will post links to Ann's Facebook page, her website, and the O'Keeffe Museum online collection at the end of this recording. So follow the links and get connected with Ann. And, this museum online collection is really outstanding. Don't you agree, Ann?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. You can be looking at amazing pictures of her paintbrushes, her collection of rocks, her clothes, her home. It's searchable. It's great. And can't get to Santa Fe while we're under lockdown. From the privacy of your own computer, you can be up close and personal with O'Keeffe.
Oh, gosh. Yes. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Most of all, Thank you to Ann Daly for all your work on this wonderful book and for a great interview.
Thanks, Francesca. You've worked so hard on all this tech stuff and making this happen. I'm really appreciative, and I'm looking forward to the whole series of other creatives that you're going to interview.
Oh, it has just been such a joy to get to know you and your work so much better, and just to have the admiration that I have for what you're doing.
Thank
so
you.
With that, we'll just say goodbye. This is Francesca Christian on the horizon, signing off.